With Operation Deep Healing coming around before the next major updates, potentially being Layer 3 and the Central Luminen, it's important that the developers make sure that the game is in an ideal state to be played, and it's way more than just bug fixes that are needed. Core gameplay elements and the way weapons are even designed also need to be fixed. So in today's video, I want to go over some changes I want added to the game with Operation Deep Healing, as well as some ideas that the developers could implement to hopefully make it more fun. Anyway, I'm live on Twitch. Come watch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/Reaconteur, twitch.tv/REACONTEUR. That's where I'm live right now, Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Not every Friday, like not this Friday, but next Friday. Anyway, go check me out over there, subscribe, and let's get straight into it. Alright, so first of all, I already made an entire video on Rapier being garbage, so this is kind of a continuation of that. Originally, it was going to be one video, but I had way too much to say about Rapier because it's just so bad and needs so many changes, and there's so many things you could do with weapons as cool as Rapiers that the developers did 0% of. Anyway, I wanted to talk about more generalized game mechanics and more broad stuff, so let's start off real quick with feints. I'm not sure if it's a weird interaction because I use Rapier and lack both swing speed of lights and the potential for hyper armor, but as it is now, I can't punish feints that I properly predict. A lot of the time, I will feint an M1 or a mantra, and then I will predict it by holding M1, and somehow they will parry against it. Or even sometimes I'll get outswung by faster light weapons, and it's like, okay, then what is the point of me outplaying my opponent just to get punished for it? Or against heavy users specifically, which I think this is the biggest problem, they'll M1, and we end up trading hits off of my play that should have been a positive interaction for outplaying my opponents, which is then nullified by game mechanics like hyper armor. Blah blah, insert some dumbass in the comments talking about game design. I'm just gonna restate this real quick. If you're good at the game, it doesn't mean you're capable of designing or making one. So just because you're like a god seeker or something, and I'm usually around like 1,000 to 1,100 elo, which is like, for reference, right? All the clips that you guys see are in like a 2-month span, and by a 2-month span, I mean one session that I'll play for 2 months. Like, I will hop on the game, play Chime of Conflict once a month, maybe once every 2 months, and I'll play like 7 or 8 games, I did not want to say 6 there, and I will just win all of them straight from 800 elo up to like 1,000 or something. But the point is, game design does not require being good at a game. There are very simple things that you should know that are required for making games, and Deepwoken should be treated like a fighting game with bouncing around PvP, right? And along with that, I usually run most of these points by that I talk about in videos where I talk about PvP balancing. I usually run these by Sheep and Sheepskin, and he's consistently like a top 5 player. So, I mean, if you're more right than me because you think you're good at the game, then he's more right than you because he is good at the game. And since he agrees with me, that makes me more right than you if you disagree with me because you think you're good at the game. I'm not saying you can't disagree with me, but if you disagree with me simply because you think that you are better at the game in PvP than me, then that's just not a valid point. Now, with all that being said, I think that feinting should at the very least temporarily decrease the frames in which hyper armor can be activated after a feint. So if someone feints an M1, I predict the feint in M1, and they try to M1 again, their hyper armor won't activate and I will interrupt their swing. It fixes the issue of brain dead heavy M1 spam being rewarded by hyper armor, and it makes it so that at the very least predicting a feint against a heavy user won't be a negative interaction for the person using their brain versus the person who decides to press one button. Along with that, I also often get outswung anyway because I have like there's no end lag on feints, which is pretty annoying, but my biggest problem is really just heavy users being able to trade M1s with me after a feint. So completely off topic. So I think that's just what really needs the fixing. I don't really care that much that people can parry after feinting because, alright, I guess you have the opportunity, even though, you know, that just made my play invalidated, but it's better than taking damage, right? Also, sorry, off topic, but I finally got a banner on YouTube. Thank you to Chick the Artist on Twitter. He's now going to be my professional artist who does all my art stuff from now on. So let me know what you guys think about the banner down below. But yeah, I really do think that like hyper armor feints is just the most annoying part of combat against heavy users specifically right now, but the second most annoying is mages, which yeah, they need a nerf, and don't worry, they'll be getting that nerf. I already know they are. Mages suck. Like right now, mantras are too strong and M1s on most weapons are too weak and are higher risk for basically, you know, every reason. Most mantras have more range than M1s, the ones that don't guard break or have other special effects to the point where you run into people in Chime who don't even need a mouse to play the game the way they spam mantras. And the worst part is, mantras do more damage than M1s most of the time. Like, there's so little reason for people to use M1s when mantras just do more every single time. And even the mantras that don't do more damage than M1s have their own little special effects like guaranteed guard breaks, exhaustion strike. I hate that mantra. That's my least favorite mantra in the game, by the way. And I think the biggest thing that caused this shift was probably the shift from Ether Reservoir to Tempo. That is Ether. Yes, Ether, not Ether, Ether. And the funny thing is that the change was meant to stop mantra spamming mage builds, but it actually only got worse because the execution was a bit off. So while Tempo on paper is a better, system than Reservoir for countering mages, both have issues that make them reward mantra spam. And along with that, other than just, Ether, Reservoir, and Tempo, the way that mantra design has changed as Deepwoken progressed has resulted in more mantras that are purposely more rewarding to just spam or throw out. Keyword being purposely. Nobody in these comments better bring up massive pre-layer 2 mantras. That was not intentional design. And while it might not be intentional design that lots of mantras in the game now feel like they were made to reward mage spam, they just do, and that's just a consequence of poorly designed mantras. Now, Tempo made it so that way you have to actually engage in combat to gain Ether regeneration. Reservoir initially did not require you to engage in combat and allowed you to just eat magic items to refill it. So yeah, people would just eat them, run away, spam mantras, and just repeat that with the 500 frigid prisms in their inventory. So on paper, Tempo is much better. However, then they thought about adding attribute cards, and they thought that was a good idea. I honestly completely blame Erudition for mage builds being so strong right now, because going 6 Erudition, then like 2 Song Chant, and maxing it out just makes it so like your tempo increases 30% more than base, which is quite a lot, and it also gives you higher caps for tempo and ether. Along with this, landing mantras refunds costs, and multi-hits do it even more, blah blah blah, you get the point, right? Now, I think the best way to change this is, first of all, it's probably just making mantras refund less ether and probably just nerfing erudition. I get the point of attribute cards was supposed to be more build variety, but the problem with that is that there's usually a best option which makes certain kinds of builds even more abusable, because nobody's going to be going even stats on their attribute cards, because attribute cards were a straight buff for characters. They didn't say, hey, you take this stat, then one will go down. They said, hey, everyone's going to be at the same base that they were pre-layer 2, but now you can just increase those stats even more now. And that doesn't even go over stuff like Salt Chemist, Ice Hero Blade mage builds, Ether Potions, Mantra Spam, Ice Hero Blade crit spam that gives them a trillion Ether per hit, and like a multi-hit crit with that annoying ass AoE, and every single one of them just decides to run away and spams that crit as you try and chase them, so that way like you can barely react to it while snaking hits. Just nerf all those things, okay? Because right now mage builds can win entire fights without needing to engage in a single parry trade, and the entire point of adding tempo was to force people to get up in your face and play with their weapons. Nerf erudition, nerf the stuff mages use. Simple. However, not as simple would be a slight rework to tempo. Actually, I lied, it is pretty simple. There's a few ways to do this. First of all, chaining mantras could drain a small bit of straight tempo along with ether. Boom, punish people for spamming, and force them into actual fights, because if all they're using is mantras, then they're not going to be getting their reservoir or their tempo back or whatever, right? Because right now people can kind of spam them, and if they're hitting them, they'll get their ether back to the point where they're not even using tempo other than for venting, which they vent after they get hit one time, and then they have 6 more vents because erudition just lets you do that. Then, along with that, let's decrease the ether cost refunds on mantras to the point where if you're not hitting M1s, you're not using mantras. Mage players right now can win fights without engaging you close up even once. If you're not throwing out swings with your actual weapon other than crits that you can easily abuse, you shouldn't be throwing out every mantra you have as soon as they come out on cooldown. The easier it is to play, the less effective I think it should be, and mages are really easy to play. But yeah, that's kind of just what I want to say about mages. There's a lot more that you could do with that, but I really think that those 2 suggestions I gave are probably just the easiest and most direct ways of doing it. Just like make people have to M1. Like actually, it's so much easier than it sounds. The devs just gotta nerf all that mage shit. And then finally, the developers have talked about how they wanted different weapons to be fundamentally different to play. And I think that's a good thing, but I'm not 100% sure if I believe they'll be able to do that super well, seeing as how all of the weapons in game are kind of the same now, with the exception of them being within their own categories like heavy, light, and medium. So I thought it'd be fun to just go over some basic things they could do as a starting point. And first of all, the difference between blunt and slash damage is basically non-existent, mostly because builds now just have physical protection on armors, which contribute to both slash and blunt, meaning 99% of builds have the exact same protection percentage for both. And one of the examples they used was Great Hammer versus Great Axe, and I think the easiest way to defer all these weapons would be to immediately make blunt damage matter and make separate resistances for blunt and slash damage. Because people just put on their armor, boom, physical resistance, and now you have like 50% physical resistance for both blunt and slash from one piece of, or well, one armor kit, and it's like, alright, well then, why are they even separate stats if they scale the same way? And by default, why don't we just change how blunt and slash weapons work, right? Make blunt weapons do less damage in exchange for slightly more stun, right? And then make slashing weapons deal more base damage, but then the trade-off would be the fact that, blunt weapons get that stun advantage. And then we can take weapons and go through what their real-life purposes and attributes are. For example, rapiers, which I talked about a lot in my last video. Some people left a pretty good suggestion that would let you change between stabbing and slashing by stance changing. You know, you press Y, you change stances, useless mechanic, right? Which, this would actually finally make stance changing useful because it's another underdeveloped mechanic that the developers brought in for like realism, but you know, they kind of forgot about it. But what it would do is, slashes could deal more base damage, but then you'd have less range, but then the stabs would have extra penetration or bleed and more range, but then less base damage. But the weapons in Deepwoken should specialize in what they specialize in real life. For example, spears, which apparently also suck, I think, in comparison to swords. Spears specialize in range, stabbing, etc., but they're kinda slow sometimes. Swords are more versatile, offering better defensive options, and are better at closer ranges. How do we make this work in game? Give spears sweet spots, which I think they actually have a talent for that, but there's no like, that shouldn't be a talent, it should just be innate, right? Give spears these sweet spots, make swords the basic well-rounders they already are, swords are fine, but then you can make spears slower, but then you can give them good range and a lot of damage, because, you know, getting stabbed with a spear hurts more than getting slashed with a sword. They both hurt a lot, but I'd rather get slashed with a sword most of the time. And just, you devs, do like historical research on actual weapons. I know it sounds like a lot, but it's way easier than it sounds. I gave you guys a 15-minute video on how to make rapiers good, and, you know, it's just, they're trash. So, you know, if I could do that in like 5 minutes of brainstorming, I'm sure the 10 developer team working on Deepwoken can do some good things with their weapons, right? Hope so. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any ideas or takes or disagree with anything that I've said, leave a comment. I read them all. I'll probably respond to them. Check out my Twitch and my live channel. Song cover in the next week or so. I'm working on it. You know, I gotta record my vocals. I'm actually pretty bad at audio blending, so if you know how to blend audio, like vocal tracks better, let me know so you can show me some stuff, because they're kind of unblended, so my vocals kind of don't stand out as they should. And if you want to hear my song covers, buy a YouTube membership at any tier, and shout out to members of tier 2 or higher: Green, Brick, Goobka, Highcard, Philip, Delusional Mo, Elstern, Fun Guns, Broccoli, Carlia the Witch, Akio Sugikuni, Burger, Vekazu, Vikori, IXKMB, and Drizzy Drake Fan. I love you all, have an amazing day as usual, and goodbye.